Minister. I'm also the guy who doesn't register his car. Please keep your Bibles open to that spot. And I thought we'd start with a little game. So, I've got some prizes here under my jacket. Okay. Giant box of chocolates. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some pictures up on the screen, and you need to guess what the picture is. The only problem is that they've all been pixelated to some capacity. So if you know what it is, shout it out, and then you can either... Actually, Ryan, do you want to come up and give people their choice of chocolate? We've got heaps of chocolates, or we've got a bag of porridge and an apple in here as well. That was supposed to be my breakfast, but didn't get there this morning.
Hey, avoid the picnics because they got peanuts.
Avoid the picnics, Ryan. Avoid the picnics, okay? So I'm going to put some photos up. If you think you know what that is, shout it out.
Minecraft.
What's that?
Minecraft.
Not Minecraft. Good guess though, because it's pixelated. It's the church! Yes! Wow! Up to one guess! Look at that, St. James Wayland. Do you want to go take the box over and offer a prize? No picnics, nothing with nuts. Alright, next one. Let's see what people can guess. Nathan Cleary, yes, thank you, Ben. I didn't know you liked football. That's good. There we go, Nathan Cleary. See him more clearly there. Next one. It's a flag. Yep, what flag?
American.
Not American. Liberia, yes! There we go, Liberia, the flag of Liberia. I'm glad you got that, Harrison. Okay, next one. Anyone want to take a stab?
Your family?
A chicken.
Chicken. KFC chicken! Wasn't cheating. Okay, next one. This is a reference to last week. A flood, yes! Who got it? Oh, you got it. Okay, well, you've said it now, so you're going to get a chocolate anyway. Give him the apple, actually. Give him the apple. Alright. Yes, the floods. The floods up in Queensland. Now, the reason I play that game with you is because we're now in our 5th week in the book of Isaiah. And it's been a bit like watching the same movie, but more and more clear over time. It's like we started with an old cathode ray tube TV. Who had one of those TVs? Just curiously. And now we're moving to ultra 4K LCD up on the screen, okay? So every week it's getting clearer and clearer. But the fundamental picture has been of two things: judgment and hope. Judgment and hope. And each week it's getting clearer and clearer. Now, last week we learned a lot about judgment through a guy named King Ahaz. Okay? Judgment and hope. We learned about it through a guy named King Ahaz. And King Ahaz was the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. And essentially God was saying, watch out. There's a flood of judgment coming. But within this flood of judgment, there was also a seed of hope. Okay? A seed of hope. And that hope was in a person, a promised son. And one of the big developments we learned is that God doesn't just give us a list of promises. He doesn't just give us a catalogue of promises. He gives us a person to fulfill all those promises, a promised son. And we know that that son is ultimately Jesus. And we learned that this son last week has sort of 5 names. Emmanuel, which means God with us. Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Peace, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, and Everlasting Father. So what we can see is that this picture of the son is getting clearer and clearer and clearer. And this week, the picture is just going to get clearer again. Now, I just want to take a second. You might be thinking, if this is all about Jesus, why don't we just go to the Gospels? Why don't we just go to the Gospels and read about Jesus? Well, the reason we go to the Old Testament and we read these prophecies about Jesus is because it makes Jesus in the New Testament even clearer. This is the stuff the guys were reading who wrote the New Testament. They knew Isaiah. And so we actually see new dimensions of Jesus when we dig into these promises in the Old Testament. And that's why we're spending such good time doing it. Okay. So this week we're at chapters 11 and 12, which means we skipped over chapter 9 and 10. So I'll give you a very quick picture of what that was like. That was a picture of judgment. So essentially, God tells these kingdoms around the time, you guys think you are so good. You think you're so good. You're just getting taller and taller in your own mind. You're like this giant tree, just getting puffed up, prideful. Pride is the enemy of being God's people. And so God says, I'm coming with an axe. He starts sharpening his axe, and he's going to chop down these tall trees, these nations, these people who think they're better than God. And he's going to chop them down until they fall over, until only a stump remains. Those are the chapters we've skipped over. And so it's a big picture of judgments. But now, at the start of our passage, we move to a picture of hope. The stump that remains. Verse 1 says, a shoot will come from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. God's promised son returns, but this time in the image of a shoot from the stump of judgment. Okay? So what are we going to learn about the son? He comes in the midst of judgment. What's the first thing we see? The son sees clearly. The son sees clearly. This promised son will see the world clearly. And that's because he's going to be empowered with God's Spirit. Look at verse 2. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. What kind of spirit? The spirit of wisdom and of understanding. The spirit of counsel and of might. The spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord. This promised son will be filled with God's Spirit so that he can do and be, and most importantly, see things that none of us can see. He will have perfect wisdom and understanding, counsel, might, fear, knowledge. And in the Gospels, when does the Spirit come onto the Son? We see that at the baptism of Jesus. Okay, when Jesus was being baptized, this is exactly what's being described. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. It comes down like a dove and rests on him and empowers him in his ministry. And so, verse 3, it says, and he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears. He will see the way God sees. He won't do senses or smells or touch. It will be the Spirit that enables him to see clearly. Now, what's the first thing you think the Spirit is going to see in the world? If you had the eyes of God, what's the first thing you think would be mentioned that he sees clearly? This Spirit-empowered Son, the first thing he sees is the poor and the needy. I think this is absolutely incredible. He doesn't see the magnificent buildings. He doesn't see the kings. He doesn't see the rulers. He sees the poor and the needy. This is our God. Verse 4. But with righteousness, he will judge the needy. With justice, he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. I think this is incredible because it's so radically different from the way the rest of humanity functions. The world now and the world in Isaiah's day was very similar in that it is full of corruption and stealing, and the primary victims of corruption and stealing, it's not the rulers, it's not the middle class, it's the poor and the needy, who time and time again are not just ignored, they're forgotten about. They're forgotten. And so the poor get poorer and hungrier and more invisible to everyone else. What do you have lying around in your house that probably shouldn't be there? You know, something that's in its wrong spot. This in my house is a bottle of moisturizer cream that I have on my windowsill. And it's been sitting there for about 5 months. Okay? Now, why has it been sitting there? Because I put it there at one point and I just forgot about it. So now when I'm walking around the house, I don't even see it anymore. I look straight past it. The problem is, in the summer, I got a really bad sunburn. That's an hour after the sunburn, so it only got worse after that with the blistering and the skin coming off. So I used the moisturizer, I put it down on the windowsill, and I just forgot about it. Now, all of us do this. This is human nature. There's something in your house which is in the wrong place, which has become invisible. But the thing is, I think this happens on a societal level as well, right? You put it to the side, and eventually, you don't think about it for a little while, and eventually you can't even see it anymore. But it's not trivial, like a bottle of moisturizer. This happens with people. This happens with people. The poor and the needy get forgotten, and they get poorer and hungrier and more invisible. But not to God. Not to God. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. And I think one of the great gospel stories which shows Jesus doing this is the story of the poor widow in the temple. If you don't know, it's from Luke 21 or Mark 14, I think. Essentially, one day, Jesus is walking in the temple, and he looked up and he saw heaps of rich people giving money to the temple, lots and lots of money they were giving. And then when no one else saw her, Jesus saw a poor widow with her last 2 coins, giving those coins to God. And he says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had. None of the disciples saw her, and probably no one else saw her, but Jesus, God's Spirit-empowered Son, saw her. When no one else is looking, Jesus is looking. And now, we, God's people, who are also filled with God's Spirit, are given eyes to see the poor and the needy. And there's so many great things we do as a church to help look after those around us. We're not perfect though. We aren't Jesus. But I think the big takeaway I think the big takeaway is that if you are poor and if you're in need, if you're doing it tough, if you are restricted in sharing in the blessings of God's good world, God sees you. God sees you. He sees how tough it is, and he sees all the injustices. He sees you and he loves you, and he will not let it go on forever. He will bring justice where there is injustice. And we know this because he tells us this in our passage today. So please take comfort. And now we're going to move to something equally incredible. The Son brings impossible peace. That's the second point for today. The Son brings impossible peace. Isaiah now moves from what the Son will see and more to what he'll do. But what the Son does is so intense that he needs to use these impossible images. These sort of images that are impossible in our reality. So look at verses 6 and 8. The wolf will lie down with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, the young will lie down together, and the lion will eat the straw like an ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. These are just impossible images. These are impossible. And what Isaiah and God is trying to tell us is that his promised son will bring impossible peace. He will bring impossible peace. Now, I grew up in Liverpool, some of you know that, and like Mount Druitt, almost everybody has big dogs. Okay, now this was my big dog growing up. Her name is Bella. Beautiful, big mutt we got from the pound, and I think she's probably the most expensive free dog anyone's ever got. And the reason she was incredible, well, she was free because we got her from the pound, but she was super expensive because of all of the medical bills. Now, it wasn't her medical bills, it was my dad's medical bills. And the problem is that when you've got a big dog and you live in an area with heaps of big dogs, whenever you go for a walk, they are just barking and arcing up at each other the whole time. And so Dad would take Bella for a walk, and she's constantly pulling on the leash, and he did his back out really badly. So he spent heaps of money sorting his back out after that because everyone had big dogs. And to be honest, the big dogs were a real problem out in Liverpool. It was so bad. Like, I saw dogs fighting each other sometimes. Like, it was pretty vicious. And my dad needed to pull me aside one day and say, Nick, if you're ever getting attacked by a big dog, you've got to know how to defend yourself. I'm like, I've got no idea how to defend myself against a dog. He said, you've got to do one of two things. The first one is either you grab the front two legs of the dog and you pull it up this way to try to release its grip, or you have to stick a finger into its butt. Someone's nodding. Eddie knows that truth as well. But it's a real problem because even though I was a young child, dogs are vicious. Dogs are vicious. They've got this instinct for blood at times. You know, my auntie one day, her dog Otto was getting attacked by another dog. And so, the dog had the other dog like lockjaw, where you just cannot release it. So she came outside running from her kitchen with a pan and just started beating this dog over the head to try to let go of her dog. And the dog would not let go. It was nuts. It's built into them. And as cute as she looks in the moment, Bella had that in her as well. It's programmed into them. Now, I can only imagine what's programmed into a wolf or a leopard or a lion or a bear. No amount of domestication is going to remove this fierce animal instinct from them. And on the other side of things, have you ever tried to catch a lamb, a scared lamb? It is almost impossible. This was my workplace before I came to college, and our neighbour's goats would climb under the fence there into our property and run around all this industrial equipment. And so me and a few other guys, we would chase these lambs around every morning, trying to catch them and get them over the gate. We would try for about an hour and we would just give up. They are so programmed to run and to feel fear and to not stop moving if they feel threatened. So what would it take to bring a wolf and a lamb together? How could you possibly get rid of a predator's programmed bloodlust? And what could you do to get rid of one of the prey's instinct for survival? You would have to destroy all the natural instincts of these creatures and replace them with love and gentleness. This is not something that we can do. Only God can do this work. Only God can bring impossible peace. And brothers and sisters, this is even more incredible when we realize that God isn't really talking about animals here. God isn't really telling us what it's going to be like in the future with animals being together. Often animals are an illustration for humans and the impossible peace that we have that we cannot achieve in humanity. Now, the first impossible peace that the promised son is going to bring is between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Judah. Eventually, the northern king will become something called Samaria, and the southern kingdom becomes something called Israel, or the Jews, or in the New Testament. And these guys hated each other. This was the whole point of the story of the Good Samaritan, if you know. It's they hate each other. But look at verse 13 of our passage. It says, Ephraim's jealousy, the northern tribe, will vanish, and Judah's enemies will be destroyed. Ephraim will not be jealous of Judah, nor Judah hostile towards Ephraim. The impossible peace we get is between impossible divisions amongst people. You know, I think, Bobby sharing about Josh this morning is a perfect example of that. You know, it's as Jesus worked in Josh's life, as he's understood the gospel, he's inclined towards peace where there was no peace. And brothers and sisters, the most impossible peace is between us, humanity, and God. It's between us and God. We were God's fierce enemy. But God's promised son, Jesus, came to bring us perfect peace with God. So what would it take for God to remove God's fierce anger against humanity? And what would it take for us to feel safe in the hands of a wrathful God? It takes God's promised son coming to die for us. And in verse 1 of chapter 12 says, although you were angry with me, your anger has turned away, and you have comforted me. Brothers and sisters, our God is a God who makes impossible peace. And then the final point is God's people sing about it. We sing about Jesus. God has graciously made his promise of hope clearer and clearer, and over the next few weeks it's going to become clearer and clearer again. And he tells us that the way we respond is in singing, knowing the immense promises of God just bubble up inside us into song. Look at verses 4 to 6. In that day, which is the day the promised son returns, give praise to the Lord. Proclaim his name. Make known among the nations what he has done, and proclaim that his name is exalted. Verse 5, sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known to all the world. Verse 6, shout aloud and sing for joy, people of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel among you. When we see Jesus clearer and clearer, when we understand the grace he's shown to us, when we understand the vision he has, the gracious vision for the poor, and the impossible peace that he brings us, we respond in song. And so why don't we invite the band up now, and we'll move straight into song. So band, can I invite you up? We're going to sing about promised son Jesus. Please stand.